So I'm here at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum, and behind me we have a Canadian-built Hawker Hurricane Mark XII. And you might think that's why I'm standing here to talk about, but I'm not actually here to talk about this. I'm here to talk about these. Now these are Nordian-built Hawker Hurricane skis, and as far as we can tell, they might be the only ones left in the world. So let's get right into this. We'll take a quick look at the history of the Hurricane Mark XII, and then we'll talk about these amazing items right here. So as I mentioned, this is a Canadian-built Hawker Hurricane Mark XII, and Canada actually built quite a few of these by Canada Car and Foundry up in what is today Thunder Bay, Ontario. So before we get a little bit farther with the skis, let's take a quick look at the history of the Canada Car and Foundry Hurricanes built here in Canada.
Before the start of World War II, as war clouds loomed on the horizon, the British government realized that many of its manufacturing plants were within reach of German air raids, and one strike could potentially knock an entire aircraft type out. They came up with a plan to produce so-called shadow factories, which would spread the production of these aircraft out to many smaller factories scattered around England to ensure their safety. But they also realized that this would not fully protect the manufacturing capacity, so it was decided to move some production overseas, and Canada was a great fit. We were an ally, part of the Commonwealth, and we had an existing supply route to get completed materials to war-torn England. A number of designs were built in Canada across all arms types, trucks, tanks, shippings, and importantly to this video, aircraft.
So the main aircraft that were built, British aircraft that were built here in Canada, include things like the Lancaster, built by Victory Aircraft, the Lysander, built by National Steel Car, the Tiger Moth, and the Mosquito, built by de Havilland Canada. The Hamptons were actually built under license out, I believe, out west.
Hey, Editor Sean here, just a quick update. The Hamptons were actually built in Ontario and Quebec. There was a group in Ontario that assembled them at Malton, which was a Victory Aircraft, same as the Lancasters, and then there was a group in Quebec that built them out of St. Hubert. And the Ontario group were built by Fleet Aircraft, Ottawa Car Manufacturing, which became Ottawa Car and Aircraft. Might do a video on that in the later videos. And the National Steel Car. And then the Quebec companies were Canadian Vickers, Canada Car and Foundry, Fairchild, and they all built them all up in those different factories and sent them all to the central manufacturing facility.
We have the Blenheim was built here in Canada as the Bolingbroke by Fairchild Aircraft, and as we are talking about here, the Hurricane was also built under license up in what is today Thunder Bay, Ontario.
The Canada Car and Foundry Hurricanes are an interesting bit of RAF nomenclature confusion. Officially, the Mark 10, 11, and 12 were built by Canada Car and Foundry, with 1,451 being built in total, and the first one rolling off the production line on January 8th of 1940. The initial version, the Mark 10, was basically a Mark II Hurricane built with CCF and fitted with the Packard Merlin 28, a license-built copy of the Rolls-Royce Merlin 20. There were officially 975 Mark 10s built, but only 285 Merlin 28s were imported for the aircraft, meaning many were shipped without engines. And even for those that were shipped with the Merlin 28, the RAF immediately removed them and replaced them with the Merlin 20. Now this was due to the Rolls-Royce and Packard Merlins having slight differences, meaning spares were specific and the two types of engines would significantly complicate the supply chain. The confusing part is, as soon as the Merlin 20 was installed, these officially became Hurricane Mark IIs, and tracking the Canadian-built Hurricanes comes down to tracing serial numbers, as they were indistinguishable from British-built aircraft. 30 of these Mark 10s were kept in Canada and powered by Merlin 3s for use by the RCAF. The next main production variant was, confusingly, the Mark 12, and these were built for use in Canada by the RCAF with the Packard Merlin 29. As far as I can tell, there were 426 of these built. They differed from the Mark 10 in a number of important ways. The Mark 10s were shipped without propellers, and they had Rodal wooden propellers fitted once they arrived in England, as shipping the propellers to Canada and then back to England did not make a whole lot of sense, and in most cases, as I mentioned, they were shipped without engines. The Mark 12s used Hamilton standard propellers sourced from the United States. These had a different style hub and required a longer prop spinner fitted, and in most cases, flew without a spinner fitted. If you see a picture of a Hurricane without a spinner, almost guaranteed it is a Mark 12. Now, the most important difference between the Mark 12 and other versions is the armament. While most Hurricanes had 8 303s, 4 in each wing, which you can see here, the Mark 12 had, coincidentally, 12. There were 2 extra guns mounted farther out in the wing located here. Now, 150 of these Mark 12s were delivered to the RAF, and due to the compatibility issues mentioned earlier, had the Packard Merlin 29s replaced with Rolls-Royce Merlin 20s, or were shipped without engines to begin with. Now, these were designated Hurricane Mark 11 in RAF service. Many of these were subsequently sent to the Soviet Air Force, and as usual, many got redesignated as Mark IIs and are very hard to track once in service. The RCAF Hurricane Mark 12s were retired in 1948, and most were put into storage, eventually being sold off to private owners or donated to various museums. This ensured that while many others around the world were scrapped or written off, the Canadian-built Hurricane survived long enough to be saved by the warbird movement, which began in the early 1960s. Of the 46 surviving Hurricanes that I can count, at least 17 are Canadian-built, with 8 of them being airworthy, with only 18 being airworthy total in the world. So now we can actually talk about these skis. Now, fighter aircraft with skis was something that was actually tested by many air forces, and the Russians successfully used many aircraft with skis. With the harsh winters experienced on the Eastern Front, as well as in Canada and Alaska, it is not surprising that aircraft with skis would eventually be implemented. The first Hurricane to be flown on skis was actually a Finnish aircraft. Now, Finland had bought 12 Hurricane Mark 1s from England, and when war on the Eastern Front broke out in 1941, Finland looked to ways to ensure the Hurricane could be kept fighting even if their airports were damaged. They tested one Hurricane with skis, HC-454, and the skis were fitted to the main landing gear legs, and they went so far as to ensure that the gear could be retracted with the skis fitted. Unfortunately, the system was unreliable, and with the fighting along the Finnish-Soviet border slowing down, the project was shelved. A Mark 10, RAF serial AG310, which was one of the 30 kept by the RCAF and assigned the RCAF code 1362, not to be confusing at all, was used as a mock-up for a ski-equipped Hurricane and tested by Canada Car and Foundry. It used skis built by Nordion aircraft that were very similar to those fitted to Harvard's. It was converted back to a standard Hurricane and was later converted to Mark 12 standards and was eventually scrapped. A new build Hurricane Mark 12, RCAF 5624, was then modified into a ski-equipped Hurricane using the equipment from 1362 and was tested at Rockcliffe in February and March of 1943. These skis were permanently mounted on struts and were non-retractable. Sources say performance was an issue and the project was dropped. That aircraft, RCAF 5624, was later lost in a lake in Quebec while serving with No. 1 Operational Training Unit in Bagotville, and there is a push to locate this as it would be a historic aircraft for the RCAF to have.
Now, the actual provenance on these skis is a little bit murky, and the actual history of how the museum got them, they're not entirely sure. But as far as they can tell, they probably are the only Hurricane skis still left in the world, and really a pretty interesting item to be able to come here and look. Now, we're going to wrap that video up here, so thank you everybody for watching. Stay tuned for some more content here from the Canada Aviation and Space Museum, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you for watching, guys, and as always, if you are interested in any of the content you see, you can access my website at www.seans-aviation.com. You can see all the latest pictures of aircraft and museums and the build logs of all of my current models and past models on that site. And if you're interested in any of this content, please click the subscribe button here on YouTube to follow more. Thank you very much, and see you guys next time.